Let's start with a mental image. I want you to, just for a second, transport yourself back in time. We're going to the Caribbean Sea. The year is 1655. And if you could, look down from orbit, it's just paradise.
It looks perfect. Turquoise water, lush green islands.
Exactly. But if you zoom in, if you look at the map of political power, it's a complete mess. It's like a chessboard that someone has just furiously kicked over.
It's an incredibly violent moment in history. I mean, you have these two massive heavyweights of the time, the Spanish Empire and the rising English Commonwealth under Cromwell.
Right.
And they are absolutely locking horns. It's a clash of empires, of religion, of economy. Ships are burning, cannons are firing, and, all the powerful people in Europe, they're just focused on who's going to control the forts and the harbors.
It's Godzilla versus Kong, but with sailing ships.
Very much.
But here's the hook. This is the whole reason we're doing this deep dive today. While these two giants are busy punching each other over flags and trade routes, there is a third group. A group that isn't standing on the bridge of a galleon. They're not in a war room in London or Madrid. They're watching from the shadows.
Enslaved Africans and the few surviving Taino people.
And they are waiting.
Exactly. They were waiting for that one moment when the giants blink. And when that moment comes, they make a move that, honestly, you could argue changes the history of the Americas more than the battle itself.
You run. So today, we are unpacking a story that is so often just a footnote in the bigger headline of the British conquest of Jamaica. We're looking at what happened in the margins.
Right.
This isn't just about an invasion. It's the story of how a Consolation Prize island became the setting for one of the most incredible resistance movements in history.
And we're being really specific here.
Yeah.
We're looking at the window between 1655 and 1660. It's that chaotic transition from a Spanish colony to an English possession.
And the unintended birth of a new nation up in the mountains.
Exactly.
So welcome, everyone. You are listening to episode 5 of the ABENG Signal. Our mission today is simple, but it's heavy. We're exploring war, flight, and the birth of the Maroon community.
It's such a pivotal chapter. We often think of the Maroons, as existing later during the big sugar boom of the 18th century. But the seeds of that resistance, the actual root system, was planted right here in the chaos of 1655.
Okay, so to set the stage, we have to talk about Oliver Cromwell. This is a man who does not do things by halves.
Not at all.
He comes up with this plan called the Western Design. Now that sounds to me like a home renovation show.
A bit more muskets than throw pillows in this one.
I'm guessing. So what exactly was the Western Design?
It was Cromwell's grand strategy, really, to completely shatter the Spanish monopoly in the Americas. You have to understand, at this point, Spain basically claimed all of it. They called it Mare Clausum, the closed sea.
Right. This is ours.
This is all ours. And Cromwell, he's fresh off winning the Civil War in England. He is riding this incredible wave of confidence. He genuinely believed he was doing God's work. So the Western Design was intended as a holy war against Catholic Spain. But let's be honest, it was also a massive armed robbery. He wanted the Spanish treasure fleets.
God and gold, a tale as old as time.
Precisely. And the plan was huge. This was not a pirate raid. This was a state-sponsored invasion fleet. He sent dozens of ships, thousands of men. The goal was to sail right into the heart of the Spanish Caribbean and just take their crown jewel.
And that jewel was not Jamaica.
Oh, absolutely not, no. The target was Santo Domingo on the island of Hispaniola.
The modern-day Dominican Republic.
Exactly. That was the administrative center. It was big, it was wealthy, it was symbolic. If England took Santo Domingo, they would effectively cut the Spanish Empire in half.
So, on paper, this looks like a slam dunk. A real shock and awe campaign. You've got this massive English force. They've got the numbers. They've got the firepower. They should have just rolled right over Santo Domingo.
They should have.
They didn't.
They did not. It was an unmitigated disaster. And we have to analyze why. Because this failure is the direct reason the English end up in Jamaica at all. It really comes down to 3 things: hubris, disease, and incompetence.
Okay, let's break those down. Hubris first.
English commanders, a guy named Penn and another named Venables, they were just incredibly overconfident. They didn't respect the Spanish defenses at all, and they certainly didn't respect the climate or the terrain. They kind of expected to just show up and, have the gates thrown open for them.
And then disease hit. The second part.
The Caribbean environment was the deadliest enemy they faced. Before a single shot was really fired in anger, you have dysentery and tropical fevers just ripping through the troops. They're drinking contaminated water. They're wearing these heavy wool English uniforms in the tropical sun. It was a complete logistical nightmare.
I read somewhere that men were literally dying in the swamps, just getting lost in the woods, falling apart before they even reached the city walls.
And that brings us to the third piece: tactical incompetence. The landing itself was a total mess. They landed too far from the city.
A basic mistake.
A huge one. They had to march for days through dense jungle with no water. By the time they actually engaged the Spanish lancers, the English army was exhausted, dehydrated, and frankly terrified.
And the Spanish knew the ground?
The Spanish knew the ground. They ambushed them. It was a rout. This great English army turned and ran, just scrambled back to their ships.
That has to be. Just so humiliating. You've promised Cromwell, the Lord Protector of England, that you're going to hand him the keys to the Caribbean. And instead, you're running away with your tail between your legs, leaving your dead in the swamps of Hispaniola.
It was a catastrophe. And this is that military disaster becomes destiny angle. Penn and Venables, the commanders, they're sitting on their ships. They have thousands of sick, angry, defeated men. They've burned through a fortune in supplies.
And they have nothing.
Nothing to show for it. And they absolutely know that if they sail back to London now, empty-handed, Cromwell might literally have their heads chopped off.
That's some serious workplace pressure.
It is.
So they need a win, any win. They need a consolation prize.
Exactly. So they pull out the map, they look south, and they see this island, the Spanish called Santiago, but the Taino had called it Jamaica.
Jamaica. So why Jamaica? Was it a brilliant strategic choice, or was it just, well, it's nearby and it looks easy?
It's much more the second one. It's opportunism.
Yeah.
In 1555, Jamaica was a Spanish backwater.
Really?
Completely. It was neglected. The Spanish Empire, they focused on the big places. Mexico, Peru, Cuba, Hispaniola. Jamaica didn't have any major gold mines. It was basically a big farm, an agricultural outpost.
So it was lightly defended.
Very lightly defended. The English intelligence knew it was a soft target.
The logic then is, if we can't have the main course, we'll take the crumbs. It's so cynical.
It's incredibly cynical. They sailed for Jamaica, not because they wanted it, but because they absolutely had to save face. So they arrive in what is now Kingston Harbor in May of 1655.
So let's contrast this with the disaster at Santo Domingo. How does the attack on Jamaica go?
Well, at first it's completely different. The English land with overwhelming force compared to the tiny Spanish garrison. The Spanish settlers see this massive fleet sail into the harbor, and they essentially panic.
Right.
There was very little resistance on the beaches. The English just marched into Villa Vega, what we now call Spanish Town, and they took it almost immediately.
So mission accomplished, raise the Union Jack, crack open the rum.
That's what they thought. They did. They occupied the stone buildings of the capital. They ate the food the Spanish had left behind. They felt like they'd conquered the island. But this is where that idea of a hollow victory comes in. Capturing the capital did not mean capturing the island.
Because the island isn't just a town, it's the mountains, the forests, the bush.
Correct. The English held the town, but they didn't control the land. And while they were celebrating in Spanish Town, the Spanish governor and the settlers, they were retreating and they were hatching a plan.
Okay.
A plan born of just absolute desperation.
And this brings us to what, chapter 3 of our story? The Spanish counter-move. They're outnumbered, they're on the run, they can't possibly fight the English army head on, so what do?
They make a fatal calculation, a decision that just changes everything. The Spanish officials, they decide to arm and free the enslaved Africans they had brought to the island.
Hold on, let's just pause on that. That is a massive roll of the dice.
It's huge.
You are a slave-holding society. Your entire economy, your whole social structure is based on keeping these people in chains. And now you are handing them muskets and machetes and saying, go fight for us.
It shows you just how desperate they were. The deal was explicit. Fight for Spain against the English heretics. And you have to remember, the religious angle was huge. Catholic versus Protestant.
Right.
And if we win, you earn your freedom.
What was the strategic logic behind that? How are they supposed to use these newly armed fighters?
Guerrilla warfare. The Spanish knew they couldn't win a stand-up fight. So the plan was to use the Africans to harass the English supply lines, to ambush their foraging parties, to basically make life hell for the invaders until reinforcements could arrive from Cuba or from Spain itself. They wanted to hold the interior of the island.
And initially, this works, doesn't it?
It works incredibly well. The African fighters, many of whom were from West Africa and actually had military experience from back home, they adapted to the Jamaican terrain instantly.
Better than the Europeans.
Oh, way better than the English, and frankly better than most of the Spanish settlers. They could strike from the bush and just vanish. The English soldiers were terrified to leave Spanish Town.
I can imagine.
If they went into the woods to hunt for cattle or find fresh water, they just got picked off.
There is such a deep irony here. The Spanish trained the very people they had enslaved in the art of war, assuming, I guess, that those people would stay loyal to the Spanish crown. They were counting on that old enemy of my enemy is my friend idea.
That was the entire assumption. They thought, these people will fight for us because they hate the English more. And for a moment, that might have even been true, but the Spanish completely forgot the third option.
The third option. Okay, this is where the story really pivots, isn't it? Chapter 4, the backfire.
It's the whole game. I mean, try to imagine the mindset of one of these African fighters. You've been given a weapon. You've been sent into the mountains, away from the plantation, away from the overseer's whip.
Right.
You're moving through the high bush. You're breathing fresh air for the first time as a free man with a gun. You look at the Spanish, who are weak and on the run and begging for your help. Then you look down at the English, who are sick and dying in the town below. And you realize something.
You realize you're the strongest piece on the board now.
Exactly. Why fight to restore the Spanish masters who enslaved us? Why on earth would we trust the English invaders who want to do the exact same thing? The whole calculus changed. Once they had the weapons and once they had the geography on their side, they realized they didn't need either crown.
This brings us to the phrase that really defines this whole episode for me: bush over bondage.
It's such a powerful concept. It wasn't just running away. That had happened before. This was a conscious rejection of the entire colonial system. They chose the hardships and the uncertainty of the bush over the quote-unquote security of bondage.
They decided to reject both crowns.
Both crowns. And it wasn't just Africans, was it? We mentioned the Taino people earlier.
Yes, and this is so crucial. By 1655, the Taino population had been just decimated by Spanish genocide and disease, but they were not extinct.
Right.
Small groups had survived, mostly by retreating into that same deep interior. So when these African fighters fled into the hills, they actually encountered the Taino.
And there's this incredible cultural exchange. The Taino knew the secrets of the land. They knew how to process cassava to remove the poison, how to use medicinal plants, how to navigate the limestone karst country.
That knowledge transfer is the absolute foundation of Maroon survival, isn't it? You can have all the guns in the world, but if you don't know what to eat or where the fresh water is, you die.
You die. Plain and simple. So the African fighters took the guerrilla tactics the Spanish taught them, the tactics meant for the English, and they turned them into a strategy for their own independence. They stopped taking orders from the Spanish captains. They started establishing their own command structure.
So let's talk about where they went. Chapter 5, Freedom in the Hills. I really want to paint a cinematic picture here because we're talking about hundreds of people, men, women, eventually children, leaving the only world they knew on the coast and heading into the complete unknown.
It was a life or death gamble. We have to be realistic about the risks. They faced starvation. There were no supply lines up there. They faced the constant threat of capture by both English and Spanish patrols who were now hunting them. But the geography of Jamaica, it offered them a natural fortress.
Describe that fortress. What is the Cockpit country? It's such a unique name.
The Cockpit country is one of a kind. It's a limestone karst landscape. The best way to picture it is to imagine an egg carton made of stone, but magnified 1,000 times.
Okay.
It's a maze of these steep conical hills and really deep bowl-shaped valleys, the cockpits. There are no rivers on the surface. All the water runs underground through this vast network of caves.
It sounds almost alien, like another planet.
And it is incredible terrain for defense. A European army cannot march in formation there. It's impossible. You have to walk single file. The limestone itself is sharp as a razor. It shreds boots. It destroys morale.
But for the Maroons,
For the Maroons, it was perfect. They could spot an enemy patrol coming from miles away. They could drop rocks on them from the heights.
Yeah.
They could vanish into a cave and come out 3 valleys over.
and then you have the Blue Mountains in the east, which is a totally different environment.
Completely different. That's high elevation, steep slopes. It's cold. It's covered in mist. Dense rainforest. And this is where the Windward Maroons would eventually establish themselves. But again, it's almost impossible for a European army to drag cannons or heavy equipment up there.
So they have the terrain, but they need more than just good hiding spots. They have to build a society. They need food. They need structure.
And this is where we see the real transition from being runaways to becoming Maroons. They began to build what you could call mountain nations.
Right.
They established what they called provision grounds, hidden farms, tucked away in the valleys where they grew yams, cocoa, plantains, cassava, everything they needed to survive. They built fortified paths where they literally cut steps into the rock that only they knew how to find.
And lookouts.
Lookouts everywhere, communicating with ABENGs, the cow horn trumpets.
The ABENG, the namesake of our channel, the ABENG signal.
Exactly. The ABENG was their communication technology.
Yeah.
It was the internet of the resistance. It could send complex coded messages across the valleys. Soldiers are coming from the north. Clear the village. Set an ambush at the river.
And the English would just hear the sound echoing in the hills and be terrified because they had no idea what it meant.
It terrified them. I love that connection too. It really shows how they were building this parallel civilization in the cracks of empire. While the English and Spanish are fighting over who owns the map, the Maroons are the ones actually living in the territory.
Which leads us to the stalemate, chapter 6. This period from 1655 to 1660 is it's a period of absolute chaos.
It really is.
You've got the English still mostly stuck in Spanish Town, dying of disease. You've got the Spanish trying to mount these counterattacks from Cuba, landing on the north coast. And then you have the Maroons in the middle, controlling the high ground, playing both sides.
The English were completely baffled.
Yeah.
They'd sent out a patrol of, say, 50 men, and only 10 would come back. They couldn't find the enemy. They couldn't bring them to a pitched battle. It just showed how fragile conquest really is.
Yeah.
You can plant a flag, you can sign a document, but you can't force the land to obey you if the people of that land refuse.
We should talk about leadership here. Obviously, the big names that everyone knows come later. Nanny of the Maroons, Cudjoe. We're not quite there in the timeline. But were there leaders emerging in this early period?
Oh, yes. The most prominent figure we know of from this early period is a man named Juan de Bolas. Some sources say Luvalo.
Okay.
He was an African leader who had managed to build a position of significant power. He commanded a large group of fighters in the hills around modern-day Clarendon. And at this stage, he's operating independently, navigating that space between the Spanish and the English.
In the structure of these groups. It wasn't just a disorganized mob hiding in the woods.
No, absolutely not. It was highly organized. You had captains, you had lieutenants. Discipline was incredibly strict because survival demanded it. If you compromised the location of the village, everyone died.
Wow.
So they developed these very cohesive, tight-knit social structures, and they unified all these diverse African groups. You had people who were Akan, Coromantee, Angolan, and they integrated the Taino survivors into these cohesive fighting units.
It's a true melting pot of resistance.
It really is. And by about 1660, the Spanish finally realized they've lost. The guerrilla war has failed. The reinforcements aren't coming in enough numbers. The English are there to stay.
And the last Spanish governor, Usasi, he flees to Cuba.
Flees to Cuba, and that's the end of Spanish Jamaica.
So the Spanish are gone. Now it's just the English and the Maroons.
Correct. And this sets the stage for the next 80 years of conflict. The Spanish distraction is gone. Now the British, as they would become, they realize that their true enemy isn't another European power. It's the people living in the hills of their own colony.
Let's jump forward just a little bit to close the loop on the international side of this. Chapter 7, the Treaty of Madrid. This happens in 1670.
Right. This is the formal paperwork. It takes 15 years from the invasion for Spain to finally officially admit defeat. In 1670, the Treaty of Madrid is signed, and Spain formally hands Jamaica over to England.
I always find these treaties just fascinatingly absurd. You have these men in wigs in a palace in Madrid signing a piece of paper. And that paper supposedly determines the fate of thousands of people in a Caribbean jungle who have never heard of them and don't care.
It perfectly highlights the gap between what you could call paper sovereignty and actual on-the-ground reality. England now owned Jamaica legally in the eyes of Europe, but the Maroons owned the interior, practically.
And the treaty meant the English could stop looking over their shoulder for Spanish fleets?
Exactly. Now they could pour all their resources into developing the thing that would make Jamaica a gold mine, the plantation economy, sugar.
And as the sugar economy grows, the conflict with the Maroons it's bound to intensify. Because the Maroons are this shining beacon of freedom sitting right next door to the hell of the plantation.
A plantation society cannot exist peacefully next to a free society of formerly enslaved people. It just can't. It disrupts the entire narrative. It offers hope to those still in chains. And so the British would go on to spend decades and fortunes trying to crush the Maroons, and they failed.
Before we wrap this up, I want to take a moment for emotional reflection. We're on chapter 8 now. We've talked a lot about strategy and geography and treaties. But let's talk about the human element, the human cost.
It is essential that we do. This wasn't just some military maneuver. This was a human rights struggle before that term even existed. I mean, think about the courage required to make that choice.
To leave the plantation, to know that if you are caught, you will be tortured in the most horrific ways or killed. You might be leaving behind family members who are too old or too young to make the run with you.
You're walking into a forest you don't fully know, with absolutely no guarantee of food or shelter. You're living in a state of constant vigilance, literally sleeping with one eye open. For years, decades.
And the sacrifice involved in that, it's that bush over bondage choice again. It's saying, I would rather suffer and be hungry in freedom than be, comfortable and fed in chains.
And that resonance just echoes through history. These communities, they were the first in the New World to force a major European empire to the treaty table, which they eventually did in 1739. They invented new ways to be free when the entire world was built on a system that said they should be property. They asserted their humanity in the face of a system that was designed from the ground up to strip it away.
That is so powerful. They didn't just run away from something. They ran towards something. They ran towards the idea of self-determination.
And that spirit, you could say that's the DNA of Jamaica. It's why this history matters so much. Isn't just about 1655. It's about that refusal to accept the status quo when the status quo is fundamentally unjust.
I want to take a moment here before we wrap up to reflect on the human element of this. We've talked about strategies and treaties and matchlocks, but I want to go back to that individual choice, that phrase, bush over bondage.
It is the emotional core of this entire story. We have to remember that these were people who had been stripped of everything. Their names, their homes, their families, their religions. They were treated as livestock.
And then suddenly the entire world catches fire around them.
And in that fire, they saw a chance. But think about the courage that took. It wasn't just running away from the plantation. It was running into the unknown.
Right.
They didn't know if they would find food. They didn't know if the Taino they met would kill them or help them. They knew for a fact the English would hunt them.
But they went anyway.
They went anyway, because the alternative slavery was simply unacceptable. That act of running, of building a home in the rock, was a declaration of humanity. They were saying, I am not property. I am a man. I am a woman. And I will die free rather than live as a slave.
And that legacy it's tangible. You can still feel it.
It is. If you go to Jamaica today, to a Kampong, to Moortown, to Charlestown, those communities are still there. They are the direct descendants of the people who ran into those hills in 1655. They still have the ABENG. They still have their own governance. That signal has been ringing for over 350 years.
It really redefines how we view history. It's not just about what the kings and generals and admirals decide. It's about what ordinary people decide for themselves when the whole system cracks.
Well said. History is made in the cracks.
So where does that leave us? The year is 1670. The English legally own the island on paper. The Maroons own the mountains in reality. And down on the coast, on a spit of sand called the Palisados, a new city is rising.
Port Royal.
The so-called wickedest city on earth.
And it's about to become the hub of piracy, excess, and unbelievable wealth.
And up in the hills, the leadership is evolving. Juan de Bolas is about to face a moral dilemma that will tear the entire community apart.
A dilemma that really questions the very definition of freedom itself.
And we have these legendary figures like Nanny and Cudjoe just waiting in the wings to take the fight to a whole new level.
The stakes are only going to get higher from here.
So what does this all mean for us today? I think it means that even when you have a clash between superpowers, like Cromwell's England and Spain, the people at the very bottom of the hierarchy, they still have agency. They can change the map.
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
The English got their Consolation Prize, Jamaica, but the Maroons got their freedom.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. But really, it's just the beginning of the story, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The British think they've won in 1670. The ink is dry on the treaty. But the real war, the first Maroon War, that is just about to begin.
There is so much more to cover. The rise of Port Royal, the wickedest city on earth happening at the same time, the legendary nanny of the Maroons, Captain Cudjoe, the complexities of the treaties that they eventually did sign.
It gets even more fascinating.
Right.
And tragically complex as well.
But we will save that for the next time. This has been episode 5 of the ABENG Signal. We really hope you enjoyed this journey into the birth of the Maroons.
See you on the next episode.
Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more uploads.
Let's keep the signal strong.
Bye-bye. See you on the next setting.